Okie dokie, and we have recording in progress. Hello, everyone who is viewing and watching this at this moment. I have a guest for you, and she is a powerhouse of a woman, gorgeous being, Christina Enevoldsen. And we are discussing today substantially deep topic of childhood sexual abuse and how that manifests in adult behavior, and where all those side effects or the effects of the abuse, where do they stem from, like what kind of behaviors and such. And Christina, it's superb to be having you here, so thank you very much for being here. I know you're the co-founder of the overcomingsexualabuse.com, and you're certified life coach who actually help people who have experienced childhood sexual abuse and incest to overcome that trauma, so that they're able to live, from the state of their power. Yeah, and her coaching is brilliant. She is really good at what she does. She's really informed, highly empathic, and she, in my opinion, really does her work, a lot of actually uncovering the root issue and focusing on both on the behavioral change and then helping you to immerse back out of those patterns that childhood sexual abuse instills in you, and is present with you when you are in it, in immersing in the healing of it, so to speak. So she is good, and she genuinely cares about you overcoming it.
Well, thank you so much for such a great introduction. I appreciate the invitation, and it's such a joy to be here talking with you.
Likewise, so brilliantly. Actually, before we started, we kind of talked a little bit of statistics, and probably, and also how they're a little bit skewed, but I wanted to give people a little bit of overview if they haven't done their research yet about how prevalent this issue is, and why I actually find it so important, both as a society that we need to address it because it's highly hidden.
Yeah.
And I don't think it serves anyone that it's such hidden. It's a shameful and taboo for some reason. It somehow wants to remain in that, and it's highly prevalent because the statistics are, it's about 32% of women globally who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, and around it was about 8 to 28% of men, kind of dependent on what was counted as childhood sexual abuse. And of those, it was 32% where the abuse happened before the child was 12. So it's very formative years to be experiencing something that is so kind of targets your sense of self, your sense of value, and your sense of power. And thus it kind of starts this ball rolling that is very it might not be a pretty sight if the child hadn't had the support, which is not, if I remember correctly, that it's not usually very common that the child actually gets, the support that she or he needs to tackle that that kind of trauma. So it can lead to, like, ever since from like teenage years, you get like hypersexuality, PTSD, obviously, because it's a huge trauma, self-destructive behaviors, what else? Substance abuse, really wanting to, to suppress it. And I think it's a depression, obviously. And what I found was highly fascinating, because with you as well, it wasn't, because one might not know why he or she does, those kind of things. And when you start to unravel, and start, the healing process, and you see all those patterns that you've like come across, it kind of like, it might be hidden from yourself as well, which I find very fascinating. But would you want to take us a bit on a journey? Like, how did you come across this work, and how have you, like, what do you do with your clients and, with yourself? Like, how?
Well, yeah, I agree that it is hidden, and it's, our culture doesn't want to talk about it. There's a lot of shame around it, and the truth is it's often hidden from ourselves. As you already said, that I was one who, it was hidden from me. I completely repressed it, which is very common, and that it's just too much for a child to cope with. And so one of the coping methods that we have when we don't have the resources to deal with something is to repress it. And so I didn't remember. And memory is kind of a funny thing. So when I say I didn't remember, I'll say I wasn't conscious of it. It wasn't at the top of my mind. I couldn't have articulated. I didn't have a sentence to say I was sexually abused. And it was a huge part of my childhood. It was from I think the first time I have a conscious memory of it was when I was about 1.5. And it was my uncle. And that also was where I learned that, now he was an adolescent at the time, and he wasn't very gentle. Some of my other abusers, they knew not to leave marks. There was more of a grooming process. It was in the context of a relationship already, and which actually in some ways is much worse. But in this case, he got me alone and was just kind of exploring, and it was very painful. And I tried to get away, and he didn't want that. Now, he was a teenager and was very strong and hurt me. Like, it was physically painful, him holding me down. And that was the beginning of me saying, oh, okay, well, it's safer not to fight. So, there's so many messages. So abuse itself has a message. We get messages, and some are overt, like nobody cares about you. You may as well not tell anybody because nobody will believe you. And as children, we're very susceptible to those kind of lies. We have no defense against them. And but there's more covert messages like, well, I must not be worthy of being protected, or I think the worst things about it is that is an attack against our identity. And that's where all the ripple effects come from, is it's at the identity level, and that is what rules our behavior. That if we believe we're trash, we're going to treat ourselves like trash, we're going to act like trash,
Mm.
as far as how it's normally defined. And when we get an idea of ourselves, and our identity, we don't realize, this is getting into, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. So maybe I should just leave it at that. But maybe we could circle back to the identity part. But in my case, just to finish the childhood part, is that my dad would come into my bedroom every morning at 4:30 and molest me. And there was a sort of I don't know if it was like a club, it was a ring, it was a group of men who would bring children and trade. And also, my dad involved me in that. And then he would send me to the next door neighbor, and he would rape me. And so all of this I repressed, and there's no escaping it. There was no changing it. There was no convincing, stop. So that was what I had available to me, is just forget about it. And, it helped me to get to the next day and the next day. And, because so many people do have that, it's a brilliant coping method. It works for the time, but as you said, because these things lead to behaviors, the self-destructive things, there's so much shame around those ways that we coped. But really understanding those ways that you coped, that's why you're alive right now. That's why you're sane. So, I just think we judge ourselves so harshly when those things are not the enemy. They were our protector. And so, part of the healing process is really changing your relationship with those things.
Yeah. And that is also like what you do with your clients, to actually get them to view them from that place, and replace new like habits and new ways of actually doing.
Yes. So with my clients, so I'll give you an example from my own life. So I had an affair with a family member, with my husband's family member, and this was when I was 22. And I had an affair with his brother, and I remember he kicked me out, and so the only place I really had to go was my parents' house. And he dropped me off over there, and my parents were so not happy about that. And they had, in the first room in the house was the living room that we never used. They never used it. I lived there from the time I was 16 till I got married, and that room was just never used. But they sat me down, and they, had a talk with me. they sat across the room. It was a fairly large room, and they sat, kind of like, I can't believe you would do that. I can't believe you came from such a good family, and how did you turn out so bad? And I felt like really so much shame already, and they were pretty much reflecting what I was already feeling about myself. But that's the thing, is I was sitting there with my arms crossed. I was across the room sitting next to them, agreeing with everything they said. That, yeah, what the heck? I don't know. But looking back on it, it's easy to see that, oh, my dad passed me around. Why was it okay for him to do that? But now, you're pointing the finger at me. I passed myself around. Well, that's kind of hypocritical, Dad. And but as I really I realized at one point in my healing that I was judging myself just as harshly, and that never works. And the reason it never works is, if we're disassociated from ourselves, this is like, if we're pointing fingers at ourselves, then, that is just a continuation of the abuse. So the things that the destructive part of abuse is, it causes us to separate from ourselves, our true identity. It causes us to, isolate ourselves. We can't trust other people, and we isolate, to protect ourselves from how bad we know we are. And, this fragmentation that comes, that we develop, masks and different identities to try to just survive, the people pleaser, and or the tough girl, or we those are all true parts of us that just split off. And so we tend to choose one and think that's us. Well, it's part of us. We take on masks that are a part of us, but that's not truly who we are. And so that's where the shame just causes more of that separation. The idea of the healing process is to come home to ourselves. It's to have that reconnection, so that we have a sense of a wholeness, so that we can engage with the world authentically and safely. I mean, so that the world does feel safe to us again.
Yeah, so I think that can be a quite a bit of like journey to come back to that the world is safe, and it's kind of like, it's not that you can be very well safe when you are like walking on it, in it. I wanted to actually address, because you a little bit of tapped in, to those shameful, I say shameful, but like really like without, the judgment part, because I don't, it's as you said, it's behaviors that we have gathered, and it's, coping mechanism, it's like strategies that we've taken on, and then, we continue them like as long as we start to really like unravel them, and there really isn't shame to them like innately. It's kind of like, I think that the trauma keeps you also like stuck in, you know, those fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and, you know, it's, you know, all like representations of, you know, especially like the people pleasing. And but I wanted to address, you know, because there are those like very I personally find very shameful things when I started my when I hit my like a little low point and my rock bottom, and I was showering in a shower trying to like wash away mine. I was feeling like very dirty, of course I was doing something, some like this sexual activity that for one part of me was really not wanting to do it, but for some reason I felt compelled. And I wanted to address that because it's those behaviors that, you know, we carried from like from the childhood to teenager and, you know, young adult or adulthoods, they in itself are very much judged, usually also by the society, which then kind of like adds to the shame. And it's really not understood why people, you know, engage in those behaviors and how to actually you know, unravel those. And, you know, the judgments are kind of harsh from ourselves naturally, and but also from the society. And I can bet like that the states might be even more judgier than like in Finland. But I found it personally really like this one specific behavior that was really, there was so much like shame attached to it. And I watched other people who have the same like abuse patterning going on, and it's, you know, connected to like people that pleasing, being sexually pleasing, and then making connections through sexuality and having that to be your first like way of connecting. And I kind of like think that it very much stems or occurs in people who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, because as you said, it's very much the abuse, because it usually shockingly happens in a relationship way, which is very twisted. That, you know, it's, you're groomed, and, you know, it's a relationship, it's the boundaries are very blurry, and, you know, it never should like be done to a child, obviously. And it's when your first encounters of like people who are supposed to be loving you and, you know, have a loving relationship with you, and there's this like this sexual element to it kind of like you create a norm in your head, and then you start to like I kept like repeating it from like teenage to ever. I remember thinking in my head before I started my 2-year celibacy, I remember thinking in my head, like, isn't this how it's supposed to be done? Like, isn't this, you know, the way that we are supposed to, you know, create this connection or this relation? And everything was very sexual first, and, you know, then maybe like loving. And it's, yeah, I think it's very much like orients to the abuse that happens in the that has happened, you know, in the, because many people actually realize, you know, that it's not like some outsider usually who like comes and, you know, abuses you. It's a relationship like that, and it really, you know, things to your mind.
Yes, there's a book called Secret Survivors, and the author Isu Bloom, she actually defines incest as sexual inappropriateness that happens in any relationship with a child where the child feels bonded with someone over a longer period of time, and is an authority. And so, incest doesn't, and the dynamics of incest, which is really what what you were referring to, is far more than just blood relatives. It's in this trusted relationship where there is supposedly love. And that's what's so insidious about it, is that our whole idea of what love is gets so skewed. And so there's, in my case, my mom was pretty distant. She didn't really, give us hugs and kisses. She cleaned and she cooked and she decorated the house really nicely. But there wasn't a lot of connection with her. There was no relationship there. And so, but my dad was the opposite. He was very warm. He was a very warm and friendly person. He would always give me hugs and kisses. And it's just that, the sexual part went with it. And so I connected those two things in my brain. And so that that leads to a lot of things that, okay, well, if I want affection, if I want connection, then sex is the way to get it. And so that means, I talk to a lot of my clients, and I was this way too, that not only is our no taken away because we just didn't have a choice, this the word no does not compute. It's not in the vocabulary, and that concept isn't there either. And but part of it is, if we believe, going back to the identity, if we believe that our worth is so low, and we believe that the only way to connect is sexually, then what else would we be doing? Where else are we going to get that kind of connection? And who, if I believe that someone only wants to be close to me and connect with me if I offer sex, then why wouldn't I offer sex?
Yeah.
If I'm, when we're starving, I think we sometimes also can judge ourselves when we don't realize how few options there were. There's the option of not survive this, or, adopt these coping methods. And, it's easy to stand and look at ourselves, our past selves, and say, I should have done things differently. But we have far more resources to us now. And, we can, we as a child, we couldn't say, Mom, Dad, this isn't working out. I'm going to go live with so-and-so. And, so, but now we do. Now the problem is updating ourselves to know the choices that we have, but it's easy to judge ourselves for as though we had the same options that we do now.
Do you think it also like really much relates to the self-hatred that comes kind of like with it? Because all the self-destructive behavior, substance abuse, it's part of like being in the dissociation and suppressing things, but it's very much part of self-hatred, I think, that that has come. So do you think it's like there's like a
Yeah, self-hatred is an interesting one. I have now come to believe that shame and self-hatred are evidence of self-love. It's the fruit of self-love. It's wanting to protect oneself, which is self-love. And so, when we do, so let's talk about shame, what it actually is. And because, all emotions, so there's pleasant and unpleasant, but there's not good and bad emotions. We tend to think of the ones that don't feel pleasant as, ones to push away. And actually, all emotions are there to serve us. And so when we don't understand what shame is there to do, so shame, we just need to understand the messages of all these emotions because they are for our benefit. Now, we don't have to be ruled by them. They are advisors, but at the end of the day, we have to be in charge of what is going on here. So as long as we're pushing them away, they're still in charge. Try to push away, anxiety or depression or overwhelm, and they're going to win. But if we understand that they are there for our own benefit, and we can hear and then take that, and then from a conscious place decide what we need to do about it, then we're so much more empowered, because I think we often feel overrun by these things. And shame is the same way. So shame is there because as humans, connection with other humans is vital. For human history, we have survived in tribes, and there was no going to another tribe. It wasn't, this isn't for me. I think I would do better over there. No. And, just even not just in tribal, history and tribal culture, but even think about, I was watching, Pride and Prejudice, not too long ago. And what stood out to me, there's a scene where, and, for whoever hasn't seen it, I'll just summarize. There was a gathering, a social event, and this very presumptuous and self-important man went to introduce himself to this very prestigious man that he thought was going to be really impressed with him. And then there's the observers, and they're saying, don't, you haven't been introduced. And that, because that was the culture, is you have to wait to be introduced to someone. And the value of that protects the tribe, because somebody is vouching for you, somebody is saying, yeah, this person's okay. And so that was just 150 years ago. And so this is something that it is very new to humans, that we can pick up and go to another community, and that we don't have to have this past following us. And that was just so, it's just so new to us. So with that in mind, part of human survival, part of how shame helps us, is that it keeps us from getting too far outside of the social norms, of those tribal rules. Different tribes have different rules, different values, different expectations. And so shame helps us to fit in. And when that toxic shame comes in, then that's something to be aware of, those, how that is not helpful. And so just like there's guilt and there's false guilt, that we need to then be understanding of, okay, shame is really there to help me. So what is it telling me I need to do? Because it's a behavior. I'll always, emotions are to get us into motion. So what is the behavior that I'm not doing now that it wants me to do? And so once we look at it from that standpoint, what is it? How is this trying to protect me? Then we can use our prefrontal cortex, because while everything is running, from our subconscious, we're powerless against it. We're just going to go with it. We're going to hide. We're going to protect ourselves if we feel the shame. But okay, so this shame is trying to protect me, and it's trying to protect me from this, from standing out too much, from getting kicked out, not fitting in. And yeah, that's great. Thank you, shame. I appreciate you trying to protect me. And even that showing appreciation through that understanding, as long as like we're pushing it away, no, it's insisting, you've got to listen to me. And it just sets up this, it's going to push harder and harder. But when we don't resist it, when we just appreciate it and let it be there, then we can have this different relationship with it. And so that starts the transformation actually right there. And then, and I forgot where I was going with that. The human history. Okay. So once we can look at things, from a more conscious place, where we have more resources, where we're creative, we can plan, we can say, okay, so what's the worst that can happen? And what can I do to prevent the worst from happening? And so we can prepare. And but a lot of times when we really look at it, we can discount that. Oh, why? This is nothing to be ashamed about. Yes, they have a culture, like that's why I can be so open about not only the things that happened to me in childhood, even though there is still a taboo about talking about incest. And there's still, me being so open about having affairs, because it was multiple, that, I've decided my values aren't the same as what anybody who would judge me for that. My value is that I'm not proud of how that impacted me. I'm proud of how I survived. I'm proud of how I changed those patterns. And if this can help one person, I know if I would have heard somebody else's story, and that would have been so helpful to me. If I can help one person, then I'm going to keep sharing. And so we can work with, wait, they can have their values. They can have their judgments. That's none of my business. I'm going to keep doing me. And that's something that happens, as the healing process goes on. And as we get into those, the root of those false beliefs about ourselves, and uncover those and yank them out and replace them with the truth, then that's something that gets easier and easier to do. But really the antidote to shame is compassion. That when we can, and that's part of why it's so important to understand where the limited resources that we had, and how brilliant we were to figure this out. We didn't have to take any classes, read any books, have any training at all. And we knew what to do. And that tells, I think that communicates to us, if we get it, how amazing we are, that, oh yeah, I survived that as a child and I figured all this out on my own. I can for sure deal with any addictions. I can for sure handle the healing process.
Yeah. How would you actually describe the healing process? But before that, I actually loved how you described, because you basically also described that you kind of like when you become intimate with shame, you also kind of like when you come over it, you kind of start to develop your own worth, and setting your own values, and thus standing in your own worth, and knowing from that place. So I think that was like gorgeously put. But how would you actually like describe the healing process that comes with all the all the overcoming the childhood sexual abuse? And also I would like to really to go a bit like what are the most common things that you see in people who have experienced it, and yet like what kind of beliefs we tend to harbor? We kind of like covered couple, like the low self-worth and and those. But how would you describe both the healing process and then what you usually like see in people who
because that is the heart of it, is what do we come to believe? And I just want to say that even though I describe it pretty simply, it doesn't mean it's not easy. Like, so I might, say something that sounds like I'm making it sound really easy, and it's not. Even the the part about shame, where we can choose, wait a minute, are these my values? Do I have other options? That, especially when fear of abandonment is huge in so many sexual abuse survivors' life, which makes complete sense. And so the thing with sexual abuse is why there isn't just, yes, sexual, so then your whole sexual identity and sex life gets just completely, just it's so not, it's just demolished, really, any our ideas about sex, about our sexual desires. And there's just so much that is around that. So obviously the sexual component would be one that is just, it's universal. I haven't talked with I don't think I've talked with anyone, any abuse survivors, sexual abuse survivors, who have a healthy relationship with sex. And part of it is not even having a healthy relationship with our bodies. I remember one time I caught a glimpse of myself while I was having sex. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And it was shocking to me that that was a woman's body. I didn't realize until I knew what was happening in the moment. It was my subconscious was catching up. It was just like, what? And it was like I didn't know that I thought of myself sexually as a little girl.
Yeah.
And so I talked about that disconnect, and that's where we that's where the goal of healing. A lot of people think it's to eliminate the pain or to stop these coping methods, but really it's to reconnect. And then the pain comes from all that disconnection. it comes from being those lies that we believe about ourselves and about how we need to be. And so pain, is one of those good things, just like the emotions. It's supposed to feel bad, so we do something about it. And so I can't remember. I lost track of what I was saying before I took that little side note.
Well, in the meantime, could you how would you actually describe it in terms with is it more like do you see it more like how do you see your own, like the power structure, or how would I describe it? How do you see them? Is it the loss of connection? Is there like a huge component of, reclaiming basically your sexuality again? Also, like you need to, get your power, connection back again. Is there like a component to it in that sense?
Definitely getting your power back. I know lots of people who consider themselves fine without dealing with the sexual thing. They've just decided they don't want to ever have a sexual relationship again. And I think it's up to everyone, each survivor, to decide. There was so much choice that was taken away, and that, if that's where they're happy, I don't think that is a necessary component. But because there is so much ability to heal in that area, I knew I didn't personally want to take that off the table. That I considered that, a necessary part of restoration of my true self. And so I know what I was getting at, because this is part of a bigger picture, that because sexual abuse takes place in the context of other abuses, emotional, psychological, financial, neglect. And by the way, a child is much more easily equipped to deal with abuse than neglect, because you can survive through the abuse, the things that are done to you. But to be abandoned is death. And so, but neglect is always a part of. So if anybody resonates with any of this, I'm going to say you were neglected. Because if you didn't have a place to go to after you were sexually abused, if you were sexually abused, then you were neglected. And predators know who is, safe to abuse and who isn't. They have a tremendous sense of self-preservation, and they know the kids who are vulnerable, and that's who they go after. And I'm not going to say anything about the grooming process, but learn about the grooming process, because I think that takes away a lot of the shame, because part of the grooming process is not only to groom the child, but to groom the parents, the whole community. And so, what else? Oh, I was getting at something else, which was the neglect. So I no clients that I've ever had have not been neglected also. Because if there is a child who is sexually abused and they do have a support system, they do have parents that they can go to, or that who notice that there's a change, and that I don't see those people because they don't need help. They got help, because that's where it became the trauma. There were no resources. There was nobody to comfort us. there was nobody to be there to put their arm around us and say it wasn't our fault. And so we're left alone to figure this out, to be there with our own pain. And that's where so many of the destructive behaviors come from, is because, you know, if you don't have the love and comfort, the nurturing that you need, a child is very resourceful and they're going to find it somewhere. For me, it was food. And, you know, that, you know, food was something that gave me a little bit of comfort. And why wouldn't I turn to food? Why wouldn't I turn to something? And so, you know, it's looking at where these things come from. So that was getting back to, you asked about, you know, messages, these false beliefs that come in. And so it's not just about sex. It's about, you know, all these, we can have all these other messages that are related to either what we didn't get that we should have, or that we did get that we shouldn't have. And we, you know, we're always, as humans, we're always looking for meaning in everything, because we want to learn how to do this life. And when we assign meaning, when we make up stories about this, then that helps us to make sense of things, to know how to get through. So again, as vulnerable children, we come up with meanings that may not even make sense, but that's out of the resources that we had, that's the conclusion that we came to. And then the way the belief system works is that the brain likes to prove that it's right. And so we then get out of that belief, we create our world is created by our beliefs. And how that happens is, it's like I'll use my my belief that I was not valuable, I was trash. And so if you put that together with remember I talked about the original abuse, I learned it's just better to just surrender, just don't fight. And then, so that when a man was attracted to me, that felt very threatening to me.
Yep.
And so with that unconscious belief that I had, I then say, well, my choice, again, because my belief system has not caught up, just like my body, you know, my view of my body, I still saw myself with the body of a child, that I said, my only choice to give in, except that I'm not going to be the victim this time. I'm going to be the aggressor. So I had very seductive behavior. It was just like that it's like a switch turned on, and I went after him. He's not coming after me, I'm going after him. And so that was all about self-protection out of those beliefs that I had. Then doing that behavior then reinforced the original thought that I had. And so it just keeps going, that I'm trash, you know, that I'm not valuable, and that it's this ripple effect that continues on and on until we deal with the original belief.
Completely and fully agree with you. And I think the belief combo that you come up with, I think it's very common with, you know, especially women who have experienced, I don't know if it differs from from men who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, if there's a difference. I think there in the studies, I think it was that the men might be more like display some kind of sort of more aggressive behavior, but I think that combo is very common, and I believe it's more like also in the, you know, in the hypersexualization pattern, very prevalent. How would you like, when people start to, because I see the healing process, but you need to come to terms, you know, that something is like really happening, and you need to start to like decide to start actually like dealing with, you know, all the things. How do you usually go about it with it? Because I've noticed that there's usually, because there's a lot of dissociation from the body and from the emotions, and not wanting to experience the emotions, being afraid of those. And then, you know, one needs to learn how to, if especially if there's like substance abuses, you need to learn how to actually hold, you know, those, you know, emotions and such, and then you can, you know, start to dismantle, you know, what you've like. But how did you went from, you know, I feel like I'm trash, and, you know, I keep, you know, doing the cycle. What was it? How did you do it? What was your...
So this kind of goes into kind of the priorities, the stages of healing, because that comes sort of after a couple other things are in place. Because to go in and face those memories and get that stuff cleaned out, it sometimes even the fear, you know, is just so much. It can be so overwhelming that we can't even go there. And that's understandable, because again, going back to the nobody's there for me, and that feeling of I'm completely alone. And when you are separated from yourself, you don't have a self to be with.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that I do is to kind of bring in some a sense of safety with the self, and that is oh, first of all, I mean, just showing people how resourceful they already are. We're, you know, getting back to the self judgments that, well, actually, this is how resourceful you are. And then it in that the changing the relationship with emotions, and kind of be that observer to watch, oh yeah, I'm having this emotion. And a lot of times we it can feel overwhelming. We can, even if we like open the door to emotion, it can feel overwhelming because there's a lot of them that have just been shut, put in the basement, and locked away. And then, you know, if we open this up, it can just, I remember it felt like this ball of strings, you know, all different colors. And if you ask me what color the ball was, well, I don't know. It's multicolored. I don't know. It's just like asking me what I felt. But it all went into, you know, this big ball of overwhelm. It's too much. And I mean, that's what overwhelm is this is too much. We're comparing what we're facing and that's big, and I'm small and I can't handle it. The message of overwhelm is too much. And so one thing we can do to deal with that is to pull out one string at a time. Okay, I'm going to pull this red one. And okay, so I'm angry, and really owning that. And so I'm getting into far more detail than, but but changing our relationship with our emotions, because our emotions are, you know, if we keep shutting out our pain, then, you know, the shame is like the breadcrumbs of where the things are that we need to deal with. And so we need to be able to feel. And so that's one of them. Another one is um, then how to change our emotional states very quickly, to feel empowered to do that, that it's not all I feel all the time and I feel this bigness all the time. No, we can feel it and then we can switch to another state. So that, you know, we can just feel so victimized by our own emotions. And so it really help people to be able to, through their physiology, so their body movements and facial expressions and positioning, and through thoughts, that we can very quickly switch from one emotion to another. And so we practice that. We practice going from I'm sad to I'm grateful. And so when you get a sense of that power, it's a, it, you have to have that to be able to risk going in, you know, to face those those things of the past, because we know, okay, well, even if this feels just incredibly painful, I know pain is my friend, and I know that I can shift to another feeling very quickly. And so it increases this capacity um, to face that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, and then there's another stage of, you know, reconnecting with that child that we once were. And so if I have found that something, a lot of things we won't do for ourselves, but if a child is in trouble, if a child is hurt, if a child needs us, then we will be there for the child.
Yeah.
And so when we connect with the child that we used to be, instead of standing in judgment or separating because she holds all the pain, you know, it's that reconnection, and that is not easy. There tends to be a lot of resistance about that in most cases, and but there's a process to go through that's why that is, you know, getting back to, you know, it's the reconnection to our emotions, it's the reconnection to all parts of us, our younger self, and all parts of us. And then we can engage with the past. We can, out of that sense of, well, because this this child self, she's still back there, I'm going to go rescue her. And
Yeah.
so it's not the absence of fear, it's the presence of courage. And the courage comes from that compassion that we feel, that we develop in that other stage that comes before delving into the memories, because it's the beliefs. A lot of the times we can identify the beliefs because, and when we look at a memory. And so, you know, a lot of times, and this is where it's so handy to have someone to do this with you, is because if you're telling somebody your story, you're talking about, you know, one time I was in the car and I was 7 years old and I was sitting in the back seat with my older brother. And even in the details, sometimes something stands out to you in the details, and to watch out for that. Okay, what did that tell me? To pay attention, because those are significant. And so writing it out or telling somebody, you know, what it is, what that memory was, and then just being there with it, and noticing. And so then, you know, keep in mind, okay, so first thing I ask myself is, what are the overt messages that I got from that? What was actually told to me? And so that's why sometimes writing out the context helps, is looking at these messages. So to look at the covert messages, those more subtle things that are a little bit harder to, not a little bit, they're harder to pick up. And so things like, you know, just noticing that, oh, my older brother was valued more than me. He was believed more than me. And so just noticing that that was the context of, you know, sometimes you might be saying, it was my fault. I should have, you know, my parents were in the front seat. Why didn't I just say something? And but by kind of like exploring what was happening here, what was I feeling? What did I already know about myself, about how I needed to be, about how the world worked, how my family worked? And so many messages are in there. And then from there to say, is it possible? Yes, I know I have believed that all my life, or, you know, for a significant amount of time. I know I have, that has influenced me every day of my life. But is it possible? Is it just possible that that isn't true?
Yeah.
And we can ask ourselves, what if, is that the truth that I would be telling to a child? You know, if a child came to me and told me the same story, would I say, oh, well, you're just trash? You know, what story would we tell a child? And specifically, we can even get to, what if my child came to me and said this? And so that helps us to kind of just get more to the truth, because it is the truth that sets us free.
Yeah.
So there's more to it than that, but sometimes it takes a little bit of work, and then it's repatterning. You know, we have muscle memory, we have patterns that we need to break from there, that, you know, we still have those beautiful grooves in our brain, those neural pathways that are used to going, oh, if a man is interested in me, seduce him, you know. So there is the patterning that then needs to break from there. But every time we practice going to that new behavior, that new thought, that we can reinforce that, and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And so there's always setbacks. There's always, you know, going back to this old behavior, and we you know, oftentimes just get really frustrated. But no, we're just practicing. And of course, when you practice anything, you're not going to do it perfectly all the time. So we just need to keep practicing. Don't get discouraged. Just pick yourself up and say, okay, the next time. And we get closer and closer. Sometimes it's, I realized, I did it again. Well, it can get closer and closer to where that first came in, where you first have that initial trigger. And that's all, that's progress. Just keep getting closer and closer and getting better and better. Just practice.
Yeah. And I think it's probably very important to people to know that you can actually like overcome it. It's obviously it's work, but it's something that you can, you know, it doesn't have to be something that is, you know, your lived experience any longer. You can actually move past it.
Yes, definitely. There's absolutely, you can heal from this. This is just as you stated, you were a victim of the past. You do not have to be a victim of these continuing patterns anymore.
Yeah. I think that's a lovely place to start to wrap up. I really loved our discussion on it, and I bet that there's a lot of value for others to see it as well. And you have a masterclass apparently coming.
Yes,
I
have a masterclass coming up that expounds on the things that it's a 3-part, so over 3 days of basically getting off the survival treadmill. That's that first part of the healing that I was talking about, changing the relationship, just, all these things, these beliefs and things that we think we need to keep resisting. And that resistance is what keeps most survivors from healing. And so that's what this masterclass is all about. And it's going to be fabulous. And the link for that is overcomingsexualabuse.com/masterclass. And there's a wait list right now. And you can get on the wait list, or registration may have opened by then. So just get on that and you'll be the first to know when that starts.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm gonna link it also, obviously, to the description box, so you can just click your way into it. Thank you so much from this discussion, and I think we covered a lot of those patterns that actually arise from being unfortunately experienced that level of abuse, and we've got to the point that what to do actually when you start to heal. And obviously my recommendation is always to people to work with other people, because it gets you so much faster to actually to overcome it, because one part of it obviously is that you have been like left out, and you haven't had the needed support. So when you work with someone else, it kind of like reinforces, and it really is so much easier to do the work with someone.
Yes, community is very important to have a support system. Definitely.
Yeah, even though there might be, usually I think that people have this, especially like trauma survivors, but people who have experienced trauma and develop this strong persona, they usually tend to, they have the isolation tactic also. So it's really important to surrender, also to working with others.
Yeah, it can feel uncomfortable, but we cannot get anything we truly want, nothing of value inside our comfort zone. So yeah, I agree. We either tend to not trust or trust too quickly, and so it can be tricky, but it can be done.
Yeah. So brilliant. So I'm gonna stop recording now, and you can check out the links below we have, so you can get more on how to start to unravel your own patterns and eye openings.